There were a bunch of teams brutalized with injuries this week. So this is going to, one, open up more interesting players on the waiver wire, and two, probably a greater need for the waiver wire with your team in particular. We're going to talk about tight ends at the end of the video. We're going to talk about wide receivers and rank them in order in the middle. But at the beginning, I want to let you know 3 players you can drop. Now, I listed both Wan'Dale Robinson and Greg Dortch as players we were looking to pick up last week. I was wrong. Let's move on. If you're looking at Wan'Dale Robinson, you actually had 50% plus of this passing offense going to Malik Neighbors. Neighbors is that certified alpha, and this is not going to be a high volume enough passing offense for Wan'Dale to be viable in fantasy as the second fiddle. With Greg Dortch, not only does Harrison submit himself as the alpha, but at the same time, Trey McBride is still that elite level tight end that is clearly going to be the number 2 in this offense. So then Greg Dortch, he's battling for the number 3 job with Michael Wilson, and with the 2 quality targets in front of him, he really doesn't have a shot to make a difference for you. And then last but not least, Adam Thielen. I'm fine just going ahead and throwing in the towel. I mean, if you are looking at Adam Thielen, it's more of an offensive situational issue than his own. At this point, I want to say that Bryce Young has no upside, right? Bryce Young couldn't throw the ball further than 15 yards down the field this past week. And even if Young does turn it around, that maybe means Deontay Johnson could possibly be interesting in your starting lineup. However, it doesn't mean that both Deontay Johnson and Adam Thielen would. So I think we're fine just letting go of all 3 of those receivers. Now let's go ahead and let's get into our top, I want to say 8 receivers on the waiver wire this week. The least interesting one would be Jalen Nailor. Now, this is going to be a wide receiver that pretty much everybody is talking about this week. Because you have the Justin Jefferson injury, Nailor actually does give you a respectable finish. If you're looking at the volume that he had in Minnesota, he did have 4 targets for 3 receptions, 54 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown. Now, I understand, yes, at this point, you have Jefferson banged up, and you have Jordan Addison banged up as well. But based off what I've initially read from Adam Schefter regarding this Justin Jefferson injury, it does sound like Jefferson is maybe not going to miss any time whatsoever. And at the same time, if we're looking at Jordan Addison, it does appear that Addison could potentially be back this week or next week. So the question with Jalen Nailor is, even if Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison were both to miss week 3, does he hit your starting lineup? The answer to that question, at least for me with my team, is hell no. He wouldn't come close. And I think the answer for you should be about the same. And then the upside for the long term isn't going to be there as you add back in Jefferson, you add back in Addison, and you add in TJ Hawkinson. So no interest. Now, wide receiver that obviously plays Monday night. So we are going to get some clarity on him very soon. I think Dotson is an interesting player to maybe pick up before the Monday night game, see what happens in that contest, then move on from him. Obviously, with no A.J. Brown here, it does appear that Jahan Dotson is going to be in line for an expanded role. Now, based off the role that Dotson had week 1, it is very difficult to come out here and say that, oh yeah, super exciting. No, I mean, he really didn't have a role in Philly week 1, but he has only been with the Philadelphia Eagles for a couple weeks now. You'd assume that that role continues to expand. Maybe this is the catalyst for him to become almost an every down player. He's going to be competing primarily with Johnny Wilson in my mind to take up those A.J. Brown leftover targets. It could potentially be Dotson. He was a productive rookie back in Washington. Not that likely, though. He's not super high priority for me. If you were picking up Dotson, I'd definitely do it before the game tonight. And before the game tonight, I'd make sure I hop on Underdog Fantasy, where you can find a free Jalen Herz pick, more than less than half a total yard, if you use promo code FLOCK. Code FLOCK is also going to get you a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Code FLOCK will also get you hooked up with a free team review over there through flockfantasy.com in one of the live streams that we are hosting every single night. You can find that link in the description and the comment section. Alec Pierce will be a wide receiver that was on the waiver wire video last week, but he's only rostered in 23% of sleeper leagues right now. Now with Alec Pierce, I honestly have a hard time giving him his credit. This is a wide receiver that did nothing as a rookie, did nothing as a second. This is a team that goes out. They draft Josh Downs last year. They draft Adonai Mitchell this year. So it looks like Alec Pierce, at least from my perspective, is maybe on the way out. Now, of course, Alec Pierce, a very different wide receiver than Josh Downs. He more so is in line with the AD Mitchell prototype, where this is a field stretching option where you're going to see those big plays that's going to help the overall offense maybe create space underneath, and not necessarily will he command a ton of target volume himself. But now this is back-to-back weeks of Alec Pierce leading the Indianapolis Colts in receiving yards, receiving touchdowns. Here he also ties with Michael Pittman Jr. for the team lead with 7 targets this week. And you have 5 receptions as well. Now, I'm still not confident that you're picking up Alec Pierce and then immediately putting him in your starting lineup. Honestly, I think he's more so just going to be that depth fill-in. But if he does continue to trend in this way, as we approach the bye weeks, which will begin to hit in weeks 5, 6, 7, then at that point, I think you could potentially look at Pierce, especially with all the injuries that we have. Now, going over to our next wide receiver that I know it's crazy that I'm saying he's a little more interesting, but I'm going to have Jaylen Tolbert here. The reason being is I am of the belief that Brandon Cooks is washed. I think we saw this last year. If you look at the underlying metrics regarding Brandon Cooks and his yards per route run declining for 3 to 4 straight seasons, you go ahead and you look at what just happened in Dallas. You actually had Jaylen Tolbert running 41 routes in comparison to Brandon Cooks at 37. Obviously, not a massive difference, but you have Jaylen Tolbert just doing so much more with less volume. You have Tolbert with 82 receiving yards off of 6 receptions. Jaylen Tolbert leads this team in targets with 9. So it does appear that Tolbert is maybe not so much as the clear wide receiver 3 behind Brandon Cooks. I think Tolbert has a very real chance to actually become the wide receiver 2 here in Dallas. You had phenomenal, and I mean phenomenal reports coming out of the Dallas Cowboys training camp regarding Jaylen Tolbert all offseason. So I think he's probably worth a roster spot. Definitely not somebody you're starting this week. And then also somebody that you're not starting this week would be one of the Rams receivers. Now, obviously, the only reason I'm interested in these guys, whether it's Demarcus Robinson, Tyler Johnson, Jordan Whittington, hook 'em Lawrence, is given the fact that now both Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are down. Now, the latest report at the time of this recording is Cooper Kupp was seen in the locker room wearing a boot. So at this point, I am kind of assuming that Cooper Kupp is going to be missing some time. Now, full transparency with you, if you get a report on Tuesday that says, oh no, Cooper Kupp's going to be good, Cooper Kupp may only miss 1 week or he may be back this week, then at that point, these wide receivers aren't super interesting for me because I honestly don't think Demarcus Robinson, I don't think Tyler Johnson, I don't think Jordan Wynn, I don't think any of these guys are that good of talents. But it doesn't matter when you're stepping in an offense that has one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL with Matthew Stafford, one of the best coaches in the NFL with Sean McVay. There will be opportunity and there will be passing volume here. Now, if I had to pick my favorite receiver out of this list, I more likely than not would be going with Demarcus Robinson. If you look at the underlying data for the opportunity that these players had this past week, Demarcus Robinson does run 28 routes in comparison to Tyler Johnson at 25. Jordan Whittington was more so a part-time player here. I think Jordan Whittington's going to be for those deeper formats. But yeah, Demarcus Robinson, in my mind, is going to be a clear every down player for this Rams offense going into the near-term future. And he would be my bet to be the wide receiver 1 for the Rams. Now, the third best receiver on waivers this week is actually the big Q. All right. Now, Quinton Johnson, I believe, was the second receiver in Underdog in terms of the most money I've invested into over the course of the offseason. Now, obviously, in your regular redraft league, I was saying, you know what? Probably doesn't make a difference. On Underdog, it's magical because if you take him at wide receiver 70, he turns out to be the wide receiver 30, you're printing money. But in your regular redraft league, I wasn't sitting here thinking that Quinton Johnson had the upside to be a top 24 receiver. I didn't think you should waste a roster spot on him or waste a draft pick on him in your regular ESPN league. But Quinton Johnson at one point last week was actually leading the Chargers in total receiving yards, total targets. Ladd McConkey had a very strong second half, and Ladd McConkey actually had that volume by the end of the game. But this week, we actually see Quinton Johnson yet again lead this team in targets, lead this team in receptions, lead this team in receiving yards, and have multiple receiving touchdowns at the same time. So if I'm projecting Quinton Johnson going into the future, would I rather have Johnston or Ladd McConkey? Ladd McConkey by a country mile. Obviously, it's very easily Ladd. Would I rather have Quinton Johnston or Joshua Palmer? There, it actually becomes a little more of an interesting question. I think Johnston could be a very interesting pickup because the reason I was drafting him when he was going like wide receiver 70, I think he ended the season as wide receiver 79 in Underdog drafts, is it's a good quarterback, good coaching staff, and ultimately it's a wide open depth chart, right? Where nobody really here is established to be that true alpha. Now, going over to a wide receiver that pissed me off to no end this week, let's look at Yoshi. Andre Yoshivas was a wide receiver that stole 2 touchdowns from my Jamar Chase, but it is what it is. You have 4 targets, multiple receiving touchdowns. One of his catches, one of the receiving touchdowns, the toe drag, it looked like a play that Jamar Chase would dream of having. Still only rostered in 15% of leagues. I think he's going to be a little more interesting in your leagues where you start 2 receivers and 2 flex spots, or your leagues where you start 3 wide receivers and a single flex. But to be honest with you, if T. Higgins misses this next week and you had a Cooper Kupp injury and you are struggling to fill in a wide receiver slot, I wouldn't mind going out there and starting him as a low end wide receiver 3, high end wide receiver 4. And T. Higgins hasn't practiced a single time, right? So it's not like Higgins is a guarantee to be here in week 3. Now, I hate to even include him on the waiver wire list. I do want to talk about him though. Jerry Jeudy was trending on Sleeper. Jerry Jeudy was one of the hottest pickups. He's already rostered in 60% of leagues, so I'm sure that this is just for extremely shallow formats. But I think that there's a non-0% chance that Jerry Jeudy turns out to be the wide receiver 1 in Cleveland. Where if you are looking at Jerry Jeudy, this is a receiver that has 6 targets, 5 receptions, 73 receiving yards, had the receiving touchdown in week 1. You take a step back and look at the contract for what the Cleveland Browns gave Jerry Jeudy this offseason, indicating, yes, that Jerry Jeudy is going to have a massive role in this offense. You look at the underlying opportunity here. Jeudy has 35 routes run in comparison to Amari Cooper at 36. Jeudy does have a decent gap on Amari in total points and just total volume this year if you're looking at receptions and receiving yards. So Jeudy, even in your 8-team league and your 10-team league, definitely still worth the roster. But obviously, if you play in any league with respectable depth, he is already rostered. But in those deeper formats, I think Elijah Moore in the same offense could be worth adding to your watch list. Because if you are looking at this offense, yet again, Amari Cooper is one of the least efficient receivers in the NFL. Elijah Moore comes out. Elijah Moore actually leads this team in targets, tied with Amari Cooper at 8. Elijah Moore has 31 routes run compared to Amari Cooper at 35. So he's an every down player. We saw the production way back in the day with the Jets. As a rookie, Elijah Moore was a phenomenal option. And now it looks like he does have that every down role essentially for the Cleveland Browns, and he's performing well. So obviously super deep format play, but more so a player I want to add to the watch list. And then going over to some tight ends to call out real quick. Brinton Strange will be a tight end that had the draft capital, that is young, that if you were to have no Evan Ingram going into the future, he could be an interesting pickup. He had 6 targets out of 30 Trevor Lawrence pass attempts this week. Strange had 65 receiving yards and 3 receptions. And obviously, tight end position is an absolute wasteland at this point. I think that this can be someone you go ahead, pick up, and if Evan Ingram does miss this next week, and you add Evan Ingram, or maybe you add Jake Ferguson, or maybe you add David Njoku, you had one of these tight ends that will be missing week 3, then at that point, you pick up Strange, you fill him in the short term, and just hope that, it's a decent offense, and he has a decent role. Our next tight end will be Zack Herz. If you are looking at Zack Herz, obviously everybody wants Ben Sinnott to be the guy. I'm sure that most of y'all are tired of Herz. I know in underdog drafts all offseason, Ben Sinnott was the guy that people were drafting. But Zack Herz now consistently is getting this target volume. I mean, Cliff Kingsbury loves him apparently. And at the same time, we see Jaden Daniels being at the very bottom of the NFL in terms of the average air yards per pass attempt that he has. He's operating just right across the line of scrimmage, dumping it off consistently to the running backs, hitting Zack Ertz consistently close to that line of scrimmage. Ertz coming off another week with 4 targets, 4 receptions, 62 receiving yards. I think he could be a fine fill-in for the short term. Obviously, the issue would be that the ceiling is potentially capped. And then I do want to talk about the Bengals receivers here as well, because this is a situation where Mike Gesicki comes out and Gesicki leads the Bengals in targets, receptions, and receiving yards. Mike Gesicki has 9 targets, 7 receptions, and 91 receiving yards. At least as an outside observer watching this game, I don't necessarily think that this is something that we can project going into the future. It seemed more that this was just dependent on the overall defensive coordinator strategy the Kansas City Chiefs had, and they were trying to take advantage, using Chase more so as a decoy, trying to gimmick up these tight ends for clear targets. if you actually look at the issue that you have with Gesicki, is he's in a full-blown tight end by committee. I mean, there were 3 tight ends that played a considerable amount of snaps. Drew Sample played 33 snaps. Eric Hall played 33. Mike Gesicki played 30. Now, both Drew Sample and Eric Hall are definitely more blocking tight ends, where Gesicki is going to be the guy running routes. Gesicki did run 21 routes, but I mean, that was only out of 41 potential Joe Burrow dropbacks. So honestly, Gesicki not a super high priority pickup on this list. The majority of these guys are just depth fill-ins if you had one of those injuries. But I think that should be it for the interesting wide receiver pickups this week. Of course, if you wanted to go take advantage of that Jaylen Herz free pick tonight, more than less than half a total yard, you can find that link to Underdog Fantasy in the description in the comment section. If you use code FLOCK when you sign up to Underdog Fantasy, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, on top of that, you're going to be getting a free team review through flockfantasy.com. All you got to do is make sure you use promo code FLOCK on Underdog, make that $10 deposit, and have an account set up on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your Underdog account. But I think that's all I got for you. Really do appreciate you and really hope I can see you after the game tonight.